Red snapper management is handled by the federal government 9 miles out to 200 miles under the Magnuson-Stevenson Act, the law is 16 U.S.C. 1851. Within the body of that act, there's a couple of things that are important to know. First off, it's the Department of Commerce that handles NOAA. NOAA then has divided its management into 5 regional councils. The one that guides Mississippi is the Gulf of Mexico or Gulf Council. Management through the Gulf Council is done by what we call fishery management plans. An FMP is both a stock assessment and also a catch and effort, meaning we have the stocks, how many fish are in the sea, catch and effort, how many are being taken out of it. And all fishery management plans have to account first and foremost, number one, to prevent overfishing, prevent a stock from being overfished, while achieving the optimum yield, meaning allowing the most access to it and harvest from it without jeopardizing overfishing or being overfished. The second bullet point, or number 9, as they call them in the national standards, is that a fishery management plan must be based upon the best scientific information available. And I guess the main issue being that Tails N Scales, the Mississippi program for counting catch and effort of the red snapper fish, is the best scientific information when MRIP is not. And MRIP being the Marine Recreational Information Program, that's the Gulf Council's chosen tool to account for how many fish are being caught by Mississippi recreational anglers. The Gulf Council, as I said, is made up of 17 members. 5 of the members are from each of the 5 Gulf states' fishery management director. 11 are kind of at-large appointments. You get 2 each state. 1 gets 3. I think it's either Florida or Texas. Mississippi's delegation is General Joe Spraggins. He is the head of the department representative. And then there's Leanne Bosarge, who is a commercial fishery person, and then Dale Diaz, who is an other or at-large member of the Gulf Council. And the history of red snapper, and today I'm only talking about recreational fishing. And when I say recreational, I don't mean charter for hire either. I mean guys like me who have their own boat who want to go catch a fish. Starting in about 1996, the fishery management plan started to shrink both the season, increase the size limit of the fish, went from about 14 inches to 16 inches, which is fine. I don't think any angler minds. We want bigger fish in the sea anyway. The older they are, the more they breed. That really has never been an issue. The bag limit went from 6 all the way down to now 2, meaning if I go out today, the most fish I can catch are 2 red snapper to bring home. But really, it's the blue line there on the left that has been the biggest issue. Starting around 1996, they cut the season down. Now, red snapper season is typically done in the summer. Kids, people vacation, not in school. But before they cut the season short, snapper fishing was generally done anyway through April through about the end of October. November, December, January, February, March, even April, the Gulf of Mexico is so windy and choppy that folks in small center console boats are just not going to venture out far to the sea to go catch red snapper. Now, if you look on the right, it's not in color, but what you see is, again, that black trend line is the federal season and the number of days it was open. And in 2017, and about 2 or 3 years beforehand, starting in 2014, it was anywhere from, 7 to 10 days, 9 days, very short seasons, shockingly short. And then it got all the way down to 2017 when the Gulf Council announced a 3-day fishing season. That never happened. We'll talk about that in a second. But what you also notice on the other trend line on the right that kind of goes up there after 2012 is the number of days that the states themselves had a, lack of a better word, non-compliant season, meaning they got tired of sort of dealing with the Gulf Council and the poor data that MRIP was producing and started opening up their own state waters for red snapper catching. Now, why was the Gulf Council's snapper season shrinking so rapidly and so fast? Well, if you look there on the left side, MRIP was telling the Gulf Council that the shorter the season got, somehow or another, more and more and more people were fishing every single day. By 2017, MRIP was indicating, if you believe the numbers, that that somewhere around 50,000, 45,000 to 50,000 fish were being caught each and every day the season was open. I think really what the problem is, if you look on the slide on the right, beginning in about 2007, a tighter season was put into place. And you got to remember, recreational fishermen, we don't go 90 miles out to catch snapper. We try to go to the closest place, 10, 15, 20, 30 miles out over artificial reef over Mississippi and Alabama. We have a really big artificial reef system. And what was happening, because we weren't allowed to fish, the fish on those reefs was getting older and bigger. But what happened is NOAA, they didn't, in their fish stock assessment, they didn't count fish on artificial reefs. Cedar 52 did not particularly survey any of these artificial reefs that we fish on. So you got a 0 in the stock column. And then what we're doing now, since we can't touch it, is our artificial reefs, the fish are getting older and bigger. And when we're catching prize fish, bring them back to the dock, and the average weight is going up faster. So they're shrinking the season on us. We're catching less fish every year. The numbers of fish is going down because the weights of them are going up. And when they do the math, they say, well, gosh, you guys are exceeding or over fishing your catch limit. You're catching less fish every year. The less number of fish is just the seasons are closing faster and the number of fish is shrinking precipitously. But because you add in the weight, the annual catch limit is in weight. Once they multiply this growing fish average fish size, it looks like the snapper fishermen are catching more fish, but they're not. They're just bigger. And again, this graph here, if you look on the Teal Line 53 all the way down to 3, that's the days of the season. And then the MRIP data, basically starting in 2010, that's thousands of fish caught per day. And if you believe MRIP, if you have to believe MRIP, then in 2017, when they had 3-day season, basically we were going to be catching 200,000 fish each and every day. The annual catch limit, the big blue line at the top, it's kind of stayed relatively stable. I guess there was a buffer applied and it kind of shrunk down. But at the end of the day, what they were saying is we were exhausting that catch limit at a fantastically high clip. Now, some sort of the facts or the points going to the 2017 3-day season. Beginning in 2012, everyone doubted MRIP. Texas and Florida doubted it so much they began saying, you know what, we're going to do our own state water season because MRIP's got it so screwed up. In 2013, Louisiana joined them. In 2014, put sort of salt in the wound. Environmental Defense Fund and the commercial fishing filed a lawsuit and basically said, hey, based on MRIP's data, the wrecks had exceeded their annual catch limit and the buffer needed to be increased. So then another 20% of the fish available for us to catch were taken away. And that resulted in the 9-day season. Well, once you get to a 9-day season, then Mississippi and Alabama said, oh, the heck with it. If that's how your math's going to work, we're going to do state seasons as well. By 2015, all 5 Gulf states had what they called non-compliant or state seasons. 2016, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana also got an extension. Before the extension, there's not a lot of snapper habitat within 3 miles of the barrier islands. Once it went up to 9 miles, we have some artificial reef complexes that people were fishing in the state season. Also in 2016, with all the states having gone to their own state season, NOAA then issued what we call exempt fishing permits to the states. Basically said, fine. It's almost a tacit admission that MRIP stunk so bad and had the season so screwed up because of both the bad numbers on, and I'll tell you why the bad numbers are coming later. We'll kind of analyze MRIP. But because it was so bad, NOAA said to the states, okay, here you go, y'all manage it. And then in 2017, based on the 2016 year fishing with state waters, NOAA said, well, we're going to give you a 3-day season now. You're catching 200,000 fish a day, which is just crazy to me. And Wilbur Ross said, you know what? It's gotten out of control. We're going to push the pause button. Gave us a 39-day season and never enforced the 3-day season. So during this crisis, this management crisis, where the season went from, down to 10 days, down to 3 days, you got to remember one very, very important thing. This is NOAA's own document here on the slide. Red snapper are not overfished and have not undergone overfishing, meaning health of the stock is just fine. It's rebuilding. Do they want it to rebuild faster? Sure. But at the end of the day, we're not talking about fish that are in jeopardy or danger or endangered. What we're talking about is the inability to manage it, the inability to account for the fish in the sea and how many you're taking back out of it. NOAA's own admission is that it's not overfished or undergoing overfishing. During the shrinking seasons, the states were then, the necessity being the mother of all invention, got some BP oil spill money and developed Tails and Scales. Mississippi did. This is the Mississippi State program that says, you know what, um, MRIP is terrible. Gulf Council, you can't manage it. We're going to do it, and we're going to develop our own app to do so. This app was developed with the grant funding and some state money. It was submitted to both peer review, and it was also submitted for certification by NOAA itself, by the National Marine Fisheries Service. What it is you take your phone, and before you go fishing, you log on to the app. That's the screen there on the left, and you get this little menu. And what you do is you hit the new trip button, and it pops up and says, okay, where are you leaving from? Are you which dock in which county are you heading out of? You get it. Then when you punch it, you get a trip number. Now, while you're out fishing, you can be boarded, and you have to show that you have an open trip ticket. And one thing that is unique about Mississippi is we have the barrier islands. You've got the pass between Pettyboy and Horn, and you've got the pass off of West Horn before the Isle Capri Bar and Ship Island, and then you've got the pass into Bay St. Louis. These are bottlenecks or choke points. And I can assure you, I've been stopped many times by DMR, and they say, okay, you got snapper on board? Yes. Well, let me see your Tails and Scales ticket. And you open it up your phone, you show them that you have an open ticket. When you return to the dock, you give them the information, how many fish you caught, how many discards you threw back, how many people were on the boat with you, how many hours you fished, and did you fish artificial reef or natural bottom, or what habitat were you trying to get your snapper off of. Over here on the right is my trip log. Every single red snapper I have caught since Tails and Scales was created is logged right there in the Tails and Scales database. Every fish. When they submitted Tails and Scales to peer review, this is the language used by the peer review. Their names, the scientists that did the report in January 9th, 2017 are listed below. Independent scientists, they're not even from Mississippi. Here's their words about the Tails and Scales survey design. Especially with high participation in the self-reporting component, this should lead to high quality estimates for the Mississippi recreational red snapper fishery. Tails and Scales program is intended to provide more data on red snapper catch and to do so in a more timely manner than the general purpose API AIS is dockside interviews by MRIP, the federal government, and telephone survey or the new modern invention of a mail-in card, or the last three is the MRIP program. So basically, the peer review, they're just supposed to look at it and say, is this design good for counting for catch and effort? Even they, right off the bat, without being asked, said, oh yeah, not only is it good, it's much better than MRIP. So once the peer review came back glowing, Tails and Scales survey design was submitted to NOAA. NOAA looked at it and they certified it. Here's their own words off their own website. NOAA says these supplemental surveys, Tails and Scales, were developed and implemented to facilitate improved monitoring of red snapper catches with respect to annual catch limits. These are their own words, NOAA's. In addition to the Tails and Scales, like I said earlier, we got an exempt fishing permit. That means Mississippi was told that they could manage their portion of the annual catch limit. By agreement with the other Gulf states, Mississippi gets 3.5%, which is the smallest share of the annual catch limit, about 150,000 pounds of red snapper each year. One of the things that came in this exempt fishing permit, though, was if the landings, if we took more fish out than our 3.5% quota allowed us to, that the next year would be reduced under the payback provision. Some of the other conditions of the permit basically said that the National Marine Fisheries Service personnel will determine if Tails and Scales landings are the best available science. Now, MRIP, what's the big problem? Let's just start with this one. MRIP was never designed to be an in-season catch and effort management tool. It was basically done to aid in stock assessment. MRIP basically does 6 interventions a year. They call them waves. There's 6 waves: January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. And what they do, and used to do up until 2017 or 2018, excuse me, they'd call folks on a landline telephone, not cell phone, landline, and say, hey, did you catch any fish in the last 2 months? And they were getting a 9-10% positive rate of anyone catching a fish, not just red snapper. And somebody said, yeah, sure, I caught a snapper. All right. So they've got these very few responses. 1 or 2 of them says red snapper. And what does MRIP do as a survey program? Well, then it extrapolates out the other 95% to come up with its final conclusion. MRIP suffers greatly from undersampling and over extrapolation. There's no disputing this. Every scientist with a brain will tell you this. Um, Now, it took many years for the federal government to improve this telephone landline calling business. And the great improvement in the 20th century was to mail a little card every 2 months. Now, to say the same thing. Did you catch fish in the last 2 months? If so, what was it? I think looking at the data, the cards, in 2019, there was 6,000 cards returned at all in Mississippi. That's not 6,000 I caught snappers. That's 6,000 cards total. And very few of those, probably in the summer during the season, responded, hey, I caught some snapper. For the most part, it could be a trout, it could be a flounder, it could be any fish. And that scant data is still extrapolated 90% further to come up with a final conclusion. There's dockside interviews, but I think honestly, the number of dockside interviews in Mississippi, if I recall right, there's data on it's like 50 a year. I know no fisherman that's ever had a dockside interview. And one of the other big problems from MRIP is it's Gulf wide. So if they do some surveys down in Florida, and then Florida had a really nice weather day, maybe it was a state holiday, a bunch of guys went out fishing. NOAA says, oh man, we got all these people fishing, and they apply it Gulf wide. Well, we could have 4 to 6 foot seas here where no one's going out in the center console boat. We're not catching anything. But as the 9-day season passed by, they just said, well, you caught your fish anyway, no matter if you went out or it was a fishing day or not. So again, MRIP, because it projects Gulf wide, never was responsive to smaller pockets like a small coastline like Mississippi is. More importantly, MRIP is a rigged game. As I said earlier on that slide, the healthier the stock, the bigger the fish. It's set in pounds. So 3.5 million pounds is a catch limit. And if the fish all of a sudden turn into ancient fish and they're 10 pounds now, well, that's just less fish that you get to catch out of the catch limit. So the healthier the stock, the shorter the season, and it should be the other way around. MRIP and just the whole model itself is inversely proportional to the health of the stock. So when we compare the two, look, Tails N Scales is real-time data. The reason it's real-time, this second bullet point, known universe of anglers. You can ask Matt Hill, Mississippi Department of Resources, who handles Tails N Scales, and he'll tell you there's about 3,000 registered anglers with Tails N Scales. And the reason is, see, like me, I've got a boat. I invite my family, I invite friends, I invite clients, I invite people out that kids never fish. I'm the captain. I'm responsible for logging in, getting my trip ticket, and reporting how many people were on the boat with me that day. There's about 3,000 of us that fish regularly. A couple hundred drop out, a couple new 100 come in, but for the most part, it's the same 3,000 guys over and over again. Not only that, they've got all our data going back since Tails N Scales was invented, and they can tell, me, I asked, I'm a 3.5 trip a year guy. I'm average. I'm kind of on the top of the bell curve. Some guys go 15 trips, some guys go 1 trip. 3.5 is kind of in the middle. I wish I could turn that 0.5 into 4 trips, but time really doesn't allow it. So you've got this known universe of anglers and all the known data about those anglers. The other thing about Mississippi that's unique, and it's very important, is we have the barrier islands, and you have to go through the pass, all right, to get home. And when you do, you get pulled over by DMR. And if they find snapper, they want to see your trip ticket. And at the beginning of each season, it's about 95% compliance. By the end of the season, after they've written the $500 fine and seized your fish, okay, you're going to do Tails N Scales next time. It's a 99% compliance. It's hard to find anyone that doesn't do it. Anglers bought in to the notion that if we give good data, we get good seasons. And that has been working fabulously for the last 2 or 3 years here in Mississippi. There's almost no extrapolation. As we're going to find out, the scientists for the Reef Committee, they said, we are darn near a census. We are almost accounting for every fish. We're not a survey model. I mean, okay, there's some discards that maybe aren't totally accounted for. There might be some folks that slip by DMR and aren't doing tails and scales. But for the most part, for 95%, we're a census of the fish taken. Now let's go to MRIP. Like I said, every piece of data is at least 2 months old. It's based on memory. It uses the prior year's data to formulate a season for next year. It's not an in-season management tool. It never was. It's like driving a nail with a screwdriver. It's not the tool designed to do this. If you believe MRIP's data, basically every registered tails and scales fisherman has to take 15 trips and limit out, catch everybody on the boat, catches his 2 fish, and we go 15 times a year. And the data, the known universe of angler data absolutely belies that and says that it couldn't be true under any stretch. So when we compare the output, the data, Tails and Scales is showing we're catching our 150,000 pound, 3.5% annual catch limit right on cue. We know how many anglers are going. We know how many trips are taken. We know the average weight because Mississippi also does dock sides. I've had my fish weighed at the dock side by some young ladies. What MRIP says in 2019 is that we went out and caught 1 million pounds. Okay, and look, 650, 898. So even MRIP's doing this. It can't even figure out what we're doing when our numbers are nice and consistent over time. Tails and Scales, steady. MRIP, all over the map because it suffers from such extrapolation and short data errors. Pointing out more flaws in MRIP, you could basically do it all day, but look at this slide. This is MRIP data that I got from the NOAA Fisheries Service. This is the data query on MRIP, as you can see them, MRIP catch time series. What MRIP believes is that in January and February of 2017, that Mississippi anglers caught 55,657 red snapper. Now, let's just break this down a second. In January and February, the Gulf of Mexico is about 45 degrees. The wind's howling at about 10 to 15 knots. The seas are 4 to 6 foot. You couldn't get anybody on my boat to go out there in the cold and the wet and get bounced around and their teeth knocked in to catch a fish, let alone 55,000 of them. I don't know how MRIP acquires such bad data, but that is a classic example. Here's what you got to believe MRIP, that not only were 55,000 fish caught, but 55,000 fish were reported to MRIP out of season. Okay, it's not even the season to catch them. It's illegal. So you're going, yeah, I caught 55,000. People are just answering the telephone or answering their mail surveys that, yeah, I caught a pile of fish out of season. It's absolute bogus. Now, there was a calibration workshop, and what calibration is some notion. I haven't found any legal support for it. I've looked. I'm not a Svengali on all of it, but I can find really no justification other than they want it to match, whatever that means. So this calibration notion come up, and I guess there's some threat of a lawsuit from the Ocean Conservancy because they don't want the states doing a better job. They want federal control so they don't have to come down here in Mississippi and lobby their screwed up ideas on how fishing is supposed to be handled. So the calibration workshop that happened in August was by scientists, right? They weren't bureaucrats, they were scientists, and they sit on this panel called the Scientific and Statistics Committee for Reef Fish. Here's the transcript from the meeting. It said this. There's scientists that said Tails and Scales is recognized as almost being a census survey, right? Not just an estimation survey, but a census of the fish caught. Some doctor, Paul Samaraco, I think he's from Louisiana, his quote is, quote, Mississippi survey really seems to ring a bell, meaning we got it more right than anyone. It's the most accurate program, or words thrown around. And then you go through that little calibration workshop, and Mississippi gets screwed the hardest. They have the largest reduction in catch on this calibration effort. So the best science gets hit the hardest. It makes no sense. The SSC recognized the difference in methodology should be explored further because, quote unquote, they don't want to penalize the state when they've greatly gone to such efforts to accurately record the catch and effort. Yet the motion to recommend these calibration ratios passed without objection. And let's use the word scaling, not calibration. One of the scientists was very clear to point out we are not calibrating. We're not considering tails and scales anymore. All you're doing is taking this tails and scales output and multiplying it by whatever number it takes to equal MRIP's number. That's not calibration. That's just scaling. There's zero consideration of accuracy. Dr. Mickle, MDMR's representative at this meeting, tried to get them to accept some sort of weighting of tails and scales versus MRIP, but it was rejected under some sort of principles within statistics. So again, the workshop verdict is just this. Mississippi's calibration ratio is the harshest penalty. It's 0.384. I'll show you what that means in a second. But again, here's the executive summary from that meeting. SSC members thought that simply scaling the state surveys to MRIP FES didn't seem to be the answer. And it's not. It's simply scaling. It does not comprehensively incorporate the incredible leap of science that Tails and Scales has made in fisheries management. And again, if you just do raw numbers, 100 pounds of snapper reported in tails and scales now automatically by edict equals 260 pounds reported by MRIP. Now, if you do that screwed up math, basically in 2019, MRIP says we caught 391,000 pounds of harvested fish. They had a million on the other screen, the calibration ratio. Since that's more than 150, well, under the exempt fishing permit, it triggers a payback provision, meaning if this is applied, if no one stops to think what they're doing, then Mississippi could have a closed season, this and many seasons to come. Now, NOAA gave Mississippi both the exempt fishing permit and told them to use tails and scales to do it. And yet here we are, 4 years later, with great data, with NOAA's own scientists praising the method, praising the numbers, praising everything about it. And we're weeks away from a Gulf Council meeting where they're going to pass some sort of screwed up scaling number to take away both fishing in the future and put us back to a 3 to 9 day season, which is ludicrous, and possibly institute payback where we don't get to fish at all. And truly, fishing management's the football, and Gulf Council's Lucy, and there is Mississippi is Charlie Brown. Now, there's something that's going on. You got to kind of blend in a little because it's been sort of merged. It's called the Great Red Snapper Count back in 2016. Again, when Gulf Council was running snapper fishing into the ground, Congress appropriated $10 million to do a better stock study. And after they did that, the preliminary results kind of came in the fall. They're still being debated as we speak. But ultimately, the preliminary indications show that there are 3 times as many red snapper in the Gulf of Mexico than NOAA has previously traded on. Basically, MRIP is a component of, again, the stock assessment, what it was meant for, and everything else that NOAA has relied upon is dismally off. They're off by a factor of 3. They got somewhere around, I don't know, 33 million pounds swimming in the sea, and there's more like 100 million pounds. And so all this fear and trepidation about exceeding the annual catch limit is hokum. Now, this isn't final results. We're still waiting on those. And I guess what the proposal is at the end of the January meeting of the Gulf Council was to maybe incorporate the newfound fish, sort of paper over the screw job of making tails and scales just scale up to be MRIP. So the best example I can give you, so based on the screw job, you take away 100,000 pounds of scaling, all right, and then you replace it with 30 or 50,000 of the newfound Great Red Snapper Count pounds. The problem I have personally with that is the increase in fish. They're ours anyway, and they belong to us, and we shouldn't be screwed just to get what are rightfully ours. Now, the challenges ahead, and what sort of drives me nuts as a recreational angler, we have very little representation, both in the Gulf Council. Right, this is the press release put out by the so-called recreational policy advisor at NOAA, and he put this out about 2-3 days before the January Gulf Council meeting, where they were trying to hammer down on this scaling and take tails and scales and just convert it to MRIP. This is what Mr. Dunn, Russ Dunn, the policy advisor for recreational fishing, said in his little announcement on January 26th. He said, it's a mischaracterization that the 2018 red snapper assessment model was unreliable because the great snapper count found more fish. No, that isn't entirely accurate. And for him to say it's not accurate, well, he's just wrong. He also says in his little missive, some constituents believe the agency is forcing states to modify their data to match the federal data. That is incorrect. Well, once again, he's dead wrong. I just showed you. The NOAA's own scientists on the SSC said exactly that. All they're doing is scaling. The third thing, the third paragraph in his little missive is he wanted to address the common misperception that the state red snapper data are more accurate and federal data less accurate or inaccurate. That's still an open question. It's an open question for anyone that hasn't looked or read any of the reviews by the scientists who say MRIP it's not even the right tool. All right. It is driving a nail with a screwdriver. Tails and Scales is exactly the right tool. So this so-called leadership is not only uninformed, but misinformed. Now, what's driving this? Why would anybody speed so fast off a cliff? And here's what I've learned over the years, and I guess this is where my wife's is to take my tinfoil hat off. But the truth of the matter is I've read this. This is a 2007 final report of the Marine Advisory Committee under the United States Department of Commerce and presented to NOAA, and this is their Vision 2020. This is how they want to see. In 2007, they wanted to see last year the fisheries look like this. And here's what bothers me the most. It says by 2020, angler satisfaction is derived from the recreational fishing experience rather than the take or harvesting of fish. Well, let me tell you, you can keep dreaming and trying to force that on us, but that's not what we as the people want. We want the liberty to go out and catch the same fish a commercial guy could go catch without having to pay him, right? If you don't have a boat, you want to buy from a commercial guy, go for it. I hope the local commercial fishermen do well. They live in my community. I got nothing against them, but I don't need them. I got a boat, I got a hook, and I know how to catch a snapper. I don't want to be forced to pay somebody to do what I can do, especially when I enjoy it so much. The Gulf Council, you can also sort of put a lot of its management failures on its composition. I mean, it's just divided to conquer each other. 51% of the snapper, it goes to the commercial fishermen. None of this tails and scales and scaling problems affects one single fish of their quota. Their allocation isn't touched by this. It's this 28.27 little slice of the pie that belongs to the Joe Six-Pack guys. This is all they're trying to take away, and a smaller slice, the 3.5% of the 28.27. That's Mississippi's share. It doesn't affect any of the other user groups that comprise the Gulf Council. All right, my final thought, and again, I kind of hit on it a slide or two ago. I mean, first, from a policymaker perspective, you can't shut down snapper fishing. It is the number one most economically valuable fish in the Gulf of Mexico. It's probably why the environmentalists want to capture it and keep it under federal control and not let a misguided state like Mississippi tell their own citizens when they can and can't catch a fish. But it also is a $700 million economic impact to the Gulf Coast of Mississippi for recreational fishing. It's huge. Boats, gas, bait, hotels, tourism, the whole 9 yards. People come to fish. People come visit me to fish. I think we go out and they spend money in this town. So again, there's a huge economic impact, and it is more than commercial fishing, which makes sense because I spend all kind of money needlessly on fishing stuff. The commercial guys, they need to keep costs lean, right, to make a profit. And so certainly recreational fishing impacts greater. Now, what really frosts me and why I'm putting my time and effort into this, look, in America, we have the public trust doctrine. Back in old England, the king owned all the fish, and you had to either pay or get permission to take them. When we got to America, we said, no, the game belongs to the people. The federal government is entrusted as a fiduciary to management properly for the people, but the fish belong to the people. If I don't want to buy a fish because I can go out there in that boat and I can go catch it, then it ought to be me free to go do that. The freedom to catch fish, it was almost put in the Bill of Rights. Pennsylvania kind of suggested it, but most of the folks back then are like, well, of course it's your natural right to go catch a fish and to go chase game. I mean, it's America, it's the land of the free. They didn't think it needed to be enshrined. Even Justice Warren Burger said it's probably the closest thing to a constitutional right without being listed in the Bill of Rights. My Mississippi Constitution guarantees me the right to hunt and fish. Okay, you can't shut me out in favor of me having to buy fish. And I guess the final thought is, look, here's why I'm doing it. And look at that picture. That's crazy old me with my son. And, you know, I don't get to put the rod and reel in my hand very often. I usually am driving the boat, getting us over the artificial reef, telling everybody what to do and how to do it, and helping them catch their fish. We do take them home and we cook them and clean them. And my son there, that's his best snapper to date. And let me tell you, when we took that thing home and we cleaned it up and cooked it and put it on the table, and we had his grandparents over and some friends over, and we were eating snapper on a summer afternoon. And my son, at that ripe old age of 7, had put the pelt on the table. His chin was out and his chest was out with pride because he was self-reliant. And, for me, look, I work hard. I work a lot of hours. I volunteer a lot of my time and money. And when it's me and it's up to me and it's my time and it's what I want to do, man, I'm there with friends and family putting them on some fish. And I guess it matters enough to me that I have spent the time to put this presentation together and to ask you guys for your help in stopping the Gulf Council from disregarding the great science that Mississippi has produced, number one, and screwing me out of a snapper season, number two. I asked the State House and State Senate representatives at the meeting if they would sponsor a joint resolution, and unanimously they said, of course. They couldn't believe what they were hearing about how our state has really achieved a benchmark in science, and it's only being ripped up and thrown in the trash for no good reason. And so we're going to demand that the Gulf Council reset calibration. Okay, go back to that science group and say, no, 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 we're not going to scale. We're going to do it right. We're going to wait. We're going to understand that this darn near census survey of tails and scales has got to carry more weight or be the standard. And MRIP can bend to it, but MRIP has not earned gold standard status. Okay, and the other thing that was debated is what we can do to go non-compliant. And I don't know what the result will be. Of course, the rebel in me advocates for it. I don't know what the state of Mississippi will want to do, but I can tell you this. As an angler, I was told that if we gave good data, we'd have good seasons. If we get screwed out of our season, I can assure you no angler is going to buy into that. Again, you'll never have a fisherman agree to help further science because it's only going to be twisted and used against us. And you will lose all faith and credibility in the anglers that what you're doing is truly managing the fishery in a proper method. I'm always available to answer any questions you guys have about this. You've got my email address. Feel free to contact me at any time. Thank you.